So you read the story about Marie, poor Marie, who went to the dentist and had a filling put in. Little did she know that the filling contained mercury, and that caused her a bunch of problems. Now, mercury is definitely a type of atom that can cause a lot of harm in our body, but it's not the only one. And a lot of contaminants can be found in water. And when these contaminants get into our bodies, they can cause a lot of issues for us, similar to what Marie went through. So we want to know, what are the contaminants that can be in water and where do they come from? First of all, a lot of ions are actually really good. We need them to survive. Our body needs them to create all the different molecules that it needs to run. Some of the good ones: iron, potassium, calcium, magnesium. You've probably heard about these on commercials for cereals, and calcium makes your bones strong. And really, these things are essential to health. If you didn't get enough of any of these ions in your diet, then you would have some health problems as well. Sometimes these are found in water. Sometimes you can find iron in like well waters and stuff like that. But for the most part, you're going to get these really good ions from the food that you eat. Now, if you have heavy metal ions in your water, that is going to be a bad thing for you. Those ions are really harmful, and the heavier the ion is, the more damage it's going to do once it gets into your body, because it's going to bind to proteins and other things. It's going to keep them from doing their jobs. And also, if it gets into your nervous system, it's going to damage your nerves. It's going to damage your brain, your kidneys, and your liver, which are filtering mechanisms in your body. And when those get out of whack from these heavy metal ions, it creates lots of problems for you. The two that were listed there were lead and mercury, and we're going to focus on those two as they're the most common heavy metal poisonings that people can get. So we're going to start off with lead, which is Pb on the periodic table. That B should be lowercase. But where does lead come from? Where can we possibly be exposed to lead in our environment? It's good to know that, because you're going to want to limit your exposure. You don't want to get any heavy metal lead into your body, because it's going to cause you a lot of problems. Paint used to be one of the main sources that lead was found in, and since, because we found that lead causes so many health problems, most paints are now lead-free. But in some older homes, I have a 100-year-old house that I live in, and in the basement, all over the walls is lead paint. That's not good. We try to stay out of that basement. But all newer paints are lead-free, because we now know that lead can cause problems. Car batteries also are going to contain lead, so you don't want to have too much interaction with that. You've heard of leaded gasoline, or maybe you haven't heard of leaded gasoline, but you've heard of unleaded gasoline. Our gasoline now is unleaded, but up until the 1970s, the gasoline was leaded, meaning it contained lead. Again, as we grew to know more about lead and that it caused all these problems, we started to ban it and take it out of most things that we interact with on a daily basis. A lot of older homes also have lead pipes. Now that can create a lot of problems, because all the water that runs into your home is going to run through that pipes, and all the water that you ingest is going to contain lead. So that can cause a lot of health problems if you have lead pipes in your home. So if you live in an older home, or you ever are thinking about buying an older home, that's something you definitely want to ask about when you get it inspected. Make sure that you don't have any lead pipes. And even back in the day, they used to put lead in a lot of toys. So kids and babies would play with these toys, and they would get exposure to lead ions. And again, not anymore. Now they have to be certified as lead-free, and that's a good thing. If you do get lead poisoning, meaning that you're getting a buildup of those lead ions in your body, that heavy metal ion floating around doing damage, some symptoms that you're going to have: you might have really bad headaches. You might get irritable. You might even get more aggressive and have trouble sleeping. Sometimes people will get abdomen pain. They'll have a hard time eating, and even will become anemic. For children, it can be even worse problems, because if you're getting those heavy metal ions into a child's body, they're still developing all of their systems. And so if you're kind of having this negative thing interacting with their systems while they're still developing, it actually causes more damage than it would in adults. So it was really important that they got the lead out of those kids' toys. But kids will have developmental problems if they're exposed to too much lead. Their behavior might be a little off. They might have some attention problems, hearing loss, kidney damage. They may even have reduced IQ, and they might grow slower. So really, exposing children to lead is very, very dangerous. Adults as well, but children even more. The other heavy metal ion that we want to focus in on is mercury, and this is the one that Marie had her problems with. Mercury also, as we've learned that it is dangerous, we have tried to limit our exposure to it, but some fluorescent light bulbs will still contain mercury. Medical thermometers used to have mercury in it. Most of them have been replaced with non-mercury thermometers. And we also used to find mercury in antiseptics, which is used to clean wounds and other medical purposes, and pesticides, which are sprayed all over crops, so then you eat the mercury. And because the widespread spraying of pesticides all over the place, meaning we put a lot of mercury out into the environment, a lot of that mercury then leached into the ground, and the mercury then leaches into our lakes and streams. And that's where most of our mercury affects us now. So because it's leaching into our lakes and streams from being sprayed out as pesticides, our fish are then ingesting the mercury. Now the mercury doesn't hurt the fish. They live just fine. But what happens is the mercury accumulates in the tissues of the fish. And the higher the fish is on the food chain, meaning the more other fish it eats, the more mercury it's going to have in its system. So you have kind of two categories here: fish that you buy. So if you want to have some salmon or some shellfish, you really have a really small amount of mercury there. But as you go higher and higher up in the food chain, if you're ever on a vacation and you see shark on the menu, you know, you can have it, but really limit your intake, because you can see here that shark has extremely high mercury levels. Same thing with swordfish. If you're ever eating swordfish, there's probably a lot of mercury in that fish. You just want to be careful not to ingest too much. Fish that you catch, this would be a lot more of the local fish that we have here in Minnesota, some of them. But again, the higher that you go on the food chain, the more mercury you're going to have exposed to. Pickerel, right here, has very high mercury. Smallmouth bass also has pretty high mercury, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. Largemouth bass, kind of medium amount. But the local salmon and mackerels and brook trout, those are lower, so you don't have to worry as much. Now, whenever you're eating fish, you just want to kind of take that into consideration. You don't want to be eating, if you have it every once in a while, it's not really going to harm you. But if you're eating fish on a fairly regular basis, you do want to be careful. The other thing to point out here is that when you eat tuna, you have light tuna and white tuna. White tuna has a lot more mercury in it than light. So whenever you're having tuna, you want to try to eat the light tuna. The other thing that mercury has been attributed to is Madhatter Disease. So you guys have all seen Alice in Wonderland, and in that movie there is a character called the Mad Hatter who's kind of goofy and doesn't really think straight, and he's kind of hard to follow. And actually in real life that's based on a real person who was called the Mad Hatter, and it was found that the Mad Hatter had mercury poisoning. So kind of all the same things that Marie dealt with when you read that story, he was dealing with, and people just thought, you know, he's kind of crazy, kind of like Marie. All of her doctors and even her husband was thinking, well, she's just kind of crazy. Later to find out it really was mercury poisoning that was making him mad.